Hunters, welcome back. I hope you guys have been enjoying the last two big monsters that we have from Monster Hunter World. AT Velk has been a ton of fun, and personally, I love Velk since it's been my favorite monster since Iceborne came out. But of course, with her comes a new FrostCraft build, and the question is it worth it for Sword and Shield? Generally in comparison to the Fatalis armor, because that's the most insane armor in the game now. There are some pros and cons for this FrostCraft build, and I'll be looking at a general raw build for this video. I haven't compared the Kiar element Sword and Shield yet, for AT Velk does have critical element, but we'll look at that at another time. Alright, let's jump in. So, looking at the build I have here, there still can be some optimization, particularly that I don't have a second attack for Jewel, but it also depends on your playstyle, so we'll go through some of the options here. Starting off, using FrostCraft means that you want as high attack as possible. You gotta get that out of the Challenger Charm. Attack jewels after that, if you have an attack 4, it would be up 2 at the top here. That refresh one isn't needed, I just don't have a second attack jewel. After that, you have a single attack, sheath and attack to max out quick sheath, and quick sheath is already on the rhyme legs at level 2, so just one more with the attack maxes that out. Finally, you also have a flight and attack because the aerial slams are quite effective. After that, you have 2 expert level 4s to max out your critical eye, and you'll need 2 tenderizers and 3 critical jewels to get those all maxed out. The armor itself already gives us coalescence max and peak performance max, which I think are really beneficial to this build, but again, it depends on the monster that you hunt. Honestly, without those 2 maxed out, this build wouldn't be worth it, but especially with coalescence being added, for monsters that you can proc coalescence effectively, this build is actually quite strong, and combining that with max peak performance from your legs, you're actually in pretty good shape for getting some high damage. Last thing, just quickly looking at the weapon here, it is a Fatalis weapon, so affinity is shit as usual, 1 affinity aug, 1 health aug, and 1 element aug. Now, that's the general part of this build, you know, your standard decos and all. Let's talk about some of the nuances here. Fatalis build used to give us max health boost, which is something we've all taken for granted at this point if you have beaten the Dragon God. This build though requires vitality jewels to be brought back, but unfortunately it's a little short on jewel slots. I've slotted in 2 here, and to be honest, if done right, you don't need the 3rd. The health aug on the weapon is pretty much enough for you to get it, plus you have max recovery on the build, which is effective enough. The only way I could see you adding 3 is if you want to drop the sheath or flight jewel attacks with a 3rd attack 4 jewel. Then you can definitely add the vitality in the level 1 slot. Alternatively, you could also just leave the attack jewel there, keep the 2 vitality, and add a 2nd handicraft to replace the flight and attack. In my opinion, that's more effective as well. I don't have 2 for level 4 handicraft jewels, but I think handicraft is quite important since Sword and Shield burns through your sharpness like anything. And quite honestly, this FrostCraft build really relies on having purple sharpness. Now, that being said, big question is in terms of damage. After testing a variety of times and asking others as well, it seems the new FrostCraft build is a little bit more reliable than the old one. This is mostly in part that most of your damage now comes from the raw Fatalis weapon anyway. Previous builds would utilize Safi but sacrifice an attack aug for an extra Velk aug, but also element was really nice back then. Now with the high raw Fatalis weapons, FrostCraft is really just the icing on top. For most combos you will generally see a higher damage output, but this build also has lower affinity, so keep that in mind. Your variability is going to be much higher. So some hunts you may get high damage really quickly, others with bad RNG you might be lower. So overall, a little bit more variability in your hunts. That being said, the armor does come with 100% critical draw, which means your first attack from sheath will always be guaranteed to be hit critical. Now, this doesn't apply to your perfect rush since it's not a draw attack, but having the guarantee that an attack with max FrostCraft will always be critical, that gives you a little bit more consistency when using this armor. And the good thing with this is that it's the first attack, so you're really open to do whatever you need to do if there's a follow-up. So here you'll see Velkhana gives me an opening, and I know my first attack is a big one, so I go in, I get a knock, and then I can reposition for perfect rush. As mentioned, after the first attack, you're going to be back down to that lower affinity. The only alternative that I could see to that is you could slot in latent power, or like the throttle jewel, and that would cover up that 10% affinity that you lose. But in my opinion, latent power is very inconsistent as it relies on taking a shit ton of damage, or waiting 5 minutes, and let's be real, most of these hunts with the Fatalis weapons now don't last more than 10 minutes. Finally, the last thing I do want to mention here is that if you are using this build, eat up for Feline Groomer and Black Belt. Groomer will help reduce that blight time so that you can proc your coalescence much quicker in the case that you don't have time to eat a nullberry. Black Belt, just simply as we know, helps with stamina since FrostCraft builds do require a little bit more movement compared to regular sword and shield. So overall, this build does have a bit more variability due to the loss of that affinity in comparison to the basic Fatalis build, but overall it does have higher damage, most prominently when you can proc coalescence and peak performance. This build does have a lot less comfort, including the loss of that health boost, no extra jewel slots for protection or evasion, and the build itself actually doesn't even come with evasion like Fatalis does. So if you're an experienced sword and shield user, this is definitely a fun and effective build. For those who aren't too well versed in sword and shield, this is definitely a challenge, which honestly you can use to improve your skills. It relies on making sure that you're hitting your main combos consistently, sheathing at the appropriate times, predicting the monster's position, and repositioning yourself as well. So quite a few things to really think about, but overall it's a really fun build, and while it's not for min-maxing experts, I'd still think it's a very strong build nonetheless. And it has a fun playstyle as usual. FrostCraft always delivers for sword and shield in my opinion. And your perfect rushes with FrostCraft is still going to deliver high damage. Even with the affinity loss, the coalescence, peak performance, and then just perfect rush in general will be much higher damage that you're seeing with FrostCraft than without it. That's about it. Just a quick little build I wanted to show you all. Been having a lot of fun. I've been trying to make this sword and shield build work for a little bit. It's been a little bit tricky up and down with the affinity, but overall I think this build has been okay for me even with my lack of jewels. If you have more jewels than me, you are lucky. RNGs has been on your side. Go enjoy this build. Till next time, hunters, Sky Sensei is out.